"Dimensional incursion contained," announced the metallic voice of the station's AI, as the blue quantum cascade dissipated from the crystalline chamber. Subject stabilized. Ilara gasped, her lungs burning as alien atmosphere filled them. Each breath tasted like metal and something akin to cinnamon, but sharper. Her vision swam, colors bleeding beyond their normal spectrum. She could see ultraviolet now, radiant patterns crawling across the walls that human eyes shouldn't perceive. "Extraordinary," said a voice like stones grinding together. It survived the transport intact. Ilara tried to stand but found herself suspended in a field of pulsing energy that held her precisely at its center. Around her, three beings conferred in rapid frequencies that shifted too quickly for her to track. One resembled a pillar of iridescent smoke contained within a hovering exoskeleton. Another appeared to be a crystalline entity whose facets refracted light in impossible directions. The third was almost insectoid, with compound eyes that independently tracked different sections of the room. "Director Krazel requests immediate genetic sequencing," said the crystalline being. "Initial scans indicate anomalous cellular structures." "Proceed," responded the smoke entity, floating closer to Ilara. The dimensional barrier breach was unprecedented. 7 simultaneous ruptures. Only Void Herald technology achieves such precision. The insectoid approached the containment field, manipulating controls Ilara couldn't see. A thin beam of light passed through her body, causing momentary numbness wherever it touched. "Impossible," the insectoid chittered, compound eyes expanding. "This is a carbon-based life form. Primitive cellular organization. No quantum integration. No dimensional manipulation organs." "Then how did it breach 7 barriers?" demanded the crystalline being. Ilara found her voice. "Where am I? Who are you?" The words came out clearly, but the alien showed no reaction. Its vocalization patterns are simplistic. "Vibration of air rather than proper psychic communication," noted the smoke entity dismissively. "Likely presentient." Ilara observed the station around her through the transparent walls of her cell. Enormous windows revealed a violet nebula stretching across the void. Ships of incomprehensible design moved between massive structures that seemed to fold inward upon themselves. She recognized enough to understand. This was a space station of inconceivable scale, and she was very far from Earth. "Neural scan proceeding," announced the insectoid. Sudden, searing pain erupted inside Ilara's skull. Her vision fractured as something invasive probed through her mind. Memories flashed before her. Quantum equations, her laboratory, childhood moments, all extracted and examined without permission. Instead of panicking, Ilara forced herself to concentrate. "This is information exchange. They're reading me, which means these patterns might be readable too." She focused on the control panel visible beyond her cell, memorizing symbols and sequences as they flashed. The burning in her mind continued, but she compartmentalized it, a technique she'd developed during 16-hour quantum calculation sessions. "Anomaly detected," the insectoid announced suddenly. "Neural patterns show structured mathematics, complex quantum formulation." The crystalline being vibrated in what might have been alarm. "Impossible. Its biology cannot support such cognition." "Summon the High Chancellor," ordered the smoke entity. "This specimen requires higher security protocols. Whatever it appears to be, it is not what it seems." As they departed, leaving automated systems to continue the scan, Ilara committed every detail of her surroundings to memory. The door mechanisms, the guard rotations, the communication frequencies. "They think I'm a threat," she realized. "That gives me leverage. Now I just need to understand enough of their language to use it." In the shadowed observation chamber above, Security Director Krazel watched the human with growing unease. Unlike any species the Council had encountered, this being showed neither fear nor confusion, only calculation. Most disturbing of all, its neural patterns were already adapting to the station's psychic background noise. It was learning, far faster than evolutionary models would predict possible. By the 7th day of her captivity, Ilara had established a routine. Each morning, she performed calisthenics in the limited space of her prismatic cell, ignoring the curious stares of passing council staff. Physical fitness had always been her anchor during stressful research periods. Now it served as both psychological comfort and a way to gauge the artificial gravity's peculiarities. The cell's transparent walls occasionally shifted opacity when certain personnel approached, an attempt to limit her observations that actually provided useful data on council hierarchies. Those granted full visibility were invariably adorned with specific crystalline patterns on their exoskeletons or environmental suits. The specimen's behavior remains perplexing, noted a Thelon guard, its crystalline form refracting the harsh light into scattered rainbows. It arranges its nutrition packets in precise geometric patterns before consumption. Primitive ritual behavior dismissed its Vordax partner, tentacles manipulating a control surface. Many non-sentient species display such patterns. What they failed to understand was that Ilara was creating a rudimentary calendar, tracking station cycles through the timing of meal deliveries and shift changes. More importantly, she was mapping phonemes in their speech, identifying repeating sounds that likely corresponded to key concepts. When xenobiologist Xenver finally arrived, his entrance was heralded by a procession of assistants carrying sophisticated equipment. Unlike the other aliens, his form was almost fluid, a shimmering, mercury-like humanoid whose surface rippled with chromatic patterns that seemed to correspond with his speech. "Greetings, anomalous entity," he began, his assistants arranging complex scanning apparatus around the cell. "I am primary xenobiologist Xenver of the Galactic Council. We will commence comprehensive analysis of your—" "Hello, Xenver," Ilara replied in his own language, approximating the tonal qualities as best as her human vocal cords allowed. "I am Dr. Ilara Chen of Earth." The mercury-like being froze, surface patterns stuttering into chaotic swirls. His assistants dropped instruments, backing away as though she had suddenly transformed into something dangerous. "Impossible," Xenver whispered, surface now pulsing rapid indigo. "The translation matrix requires quantum entanglement with the speech centers off." "Not impossible, just pattern recognition," Ilara explained, switching to English before returning to their language. "All languages have structure. I analyzed guard conversations, identified repeating sounds, mapped them to likely concepts, and constructed a basic syntax model." One assistant fled the room entirely. Another was frantically communicating through a device embedded in its exoskeleton. "How many days have you been here?" Xenver asked, his tone now cautious. "7 station cycles," Ilara replied. "Though I can't be certain of the correlation to Earth days without understanding your temporal standards." Xenver approached the containment field, silver form rippling with what might have been scientific fascination overtaking fear. "You've constructed a working knowledge of High Council speech in 7 cycles through observation alone, without neural implants or translation technology." Ilara shrugged. "Your guards are chatty, especially the crystalline ones. Thelon, I believe they're called. They seem particularly fond of discussing something called resonance entertainment frequencies. I gather it's your equivalent of television." The xenobiologist's surface now displayed patterns Ilara hadn't seen before, rapidly shifting fractals that spread from center mass outward. "What are you?" he asked softly. "I told you. Human. From Earth." She pressed her hand against the energy field separating them. "And I'd very much like to know why I'm being held prisoner and what you intend to do with me." In the observation chamber, the council representatives watched in stunned silence. The security director's voice, when it finally came, was tight with barely controlled alarm. "Terminate the interview, increase security protocols, and convene an emergency council session." The Vordax commander's tentacles twisted in agitation. "Whatever this human is, it represents an intelligence profile we have never encountered, one that our containment protocols may be inadequate to handle." The Grand Council chamber hummed with tension, 17 pedestals arranged in a perfect circle supported representatives of the founding species, while hundreds more delegates filled the ascending tiers. Massive holographic displays projected images of Ilara's cell, where she sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed in apparent meditation. The security breach occurred exactly 14 cycles after initial containment, reported Krazel, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the crimson emergency lighting. The specimen. Dr. Chen, corrected Sub-Minister Lethria, her bioluminescent tendrils pulsing softly. If we're to respect first contact protocol, we should use her self-designation. The prisoner, Krazel continued pointedly, somehow bypassed 7 layers of quantum encryption to access terminal functions. Not through any technology we can detect, but through observation and extrapolation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as the display changed to show Ilara dismantling the waste reclamation unit in her cell, reconfiguring components with bare hands into what security eventually identified as a crude signal amplifier. High Chancellor Vexorn's voice resonated through the chamber. Explain how this is possible. Xenobiologist Fenver, the mercury-like scientist, floated forward, surface rippling with uncertainty. We have never encountered a species with this particular cognitive architecture. Humans appear to possess an unusual combination of analytical reasoning and intuitive leaps that— Spare us the scientific fascination, interrupted Security Director Krazel. The fact remains that this being represents an unclassified threat. A new voice cut through the debate, melodic yet authoritative. Ambassador Tirash of the Mithrai ascended to the speaker's platform, silver scales gleaming under the chamber lights. The reptilian diplomat was known for pragmatism rare among council idealists. Perhaps we've been asking the wrong questions, Tirash suggested. Not what this human is capable of, but why she hasn't attempted escape yet. She's bypassed security measures sophisticated enough to contain telepaths and energy beings, yet chooses to remain in her cell, gathering information. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled. She's assessing us, Tirash continued. Learning our weaknesses, yes, but also our structure, our customs. This suggests a diplomatic rather than hostile intent. On the display, Ilara's eyes suddenly opened. She looked directly at the hidden observation lens and spoke clearly in perfect High Council speech. I can hear your deliberations through the ventilation system, she stated calmly. If you have questions about human intentions, perhaps asking directly would be more efficient than speculating. The chamber erupted into chaos. Chancellor Vexorn's thunderous voice eventually restored order. It seems the decision has been made for us, he said grimly. Initiate first contact protocol. Transfer the human to diplomatic quarters under guard. The diplomatic suite was luxurious by comparison to her cell, though still alien in design. Gravity was lighter here, surfaces optimized for species with exoskeletons rather than internal bone structures. Ambassador Tirash entered alone, silver scales catching the light as he performed the formal greeting gesture, one clawed hand pressed to his chest. Dr. Chen, I am Ambassador Tirash of the Mithrai Collective. I've been appointed as your liaison to the Council. Ilara mirrored his gesture precisely. Thank you, Ambassador. I appreciate the improved accommodations. You've caused quite an uproar, Tirash said, mandibles clicking in what Ilara interpreted as amusement. Some council members believe you represent an advanced scouting party for a human invasion force. Ilara laughed, the first genuine expression of emotion she'd allowed herself since arrival. If they could see Earth now, they'd be less concerned. We've barely managed sustainable fusion. Interstellar travel is still theoretical. Tirash's inner eyelids flickered in surprise. Yet you were conducting quantum barrier experiments. Small scale. Theoretical physics. Ilara moved to the viewport, gazing at the stars and unfamiliar constellations. I need to understand something, Ambassador. If humans haven't made official contact with your council, why do I sense some species already know about us? The security protocols implemented when I arrived were too specific, too tailored for human containment. Tirash's scales flattened against his body. a sign of discomfort Ilara had already learned to recognize. That, he said quietly, is precisely what some of us have begun to ask as well. The diplomatic wing's alarms shrieked at a frequency that made Ilara's teeth ache. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in pulsing crimson as she pressed her ear against the sealed door of her quarters. Environmental system failure in Sector 8, announced the station eye, its melodic voice incongruously calm. Atmospheric contamination detected. Emergency protocols engaged. Ilara's scientific mind quickly processed the implications. Sector 8, where she was currently housed along with 17 other diplomatic representatives. The ventilation system had sealed automatically, but the damage was done. Some form of toxin was already dispersing through the diplomatic wing. A hissing sound from the ventilation grate confirmed her fears. Without hesitation, Ilara dragged the hydration unit from the wall, exposing filtration components designed for removing impurities from various species' drinking water. Working swiftly, she disassembled the mechanism, extracting semi-permeable membranes and carbon filtration elements. Toxin concentration approaching critical levels, the AI updated as Ilara's fingers fumbled with unfamiliar technology. The suite's bedding material, a strange fibrous substance that adjusted to body temperature, proved unexpectedly useful. She tore it into strips, wrapping layers around the filtration components to create a makeshift respirator. As she worked, Ilara's mind raced through chemical possibilities. The council station supported hundreds of species with different atmospheric requirements. Any number of gases could be toxic in the wrong concentration, but the symptoms would vary by biology. A thud against her door shifted her focus. Someone, or something, was outside. Ilara pressed her eye to the small viewport and saw Ambassador Tirash collapsed in the corridor, silver scales dulling as his respiratory system failed. Beyond him, other diplomatic representatives lay motionless or struggled weakly. Decision made. Ilara overrode the door's emergency lockdown, using the code sequence she'd memorized from watching security personnel. The door slid open, releasing a cloud of greenish vapor into her quarters. Holding her makeshift respirator to her face, she dragged Tirash inside. The ambassador's normally vibrant scales had faded to a sickly gray, his breathing shallow and labored. Mithray respiratory system. Specialized oxygen absorption, she muttered, recalling details from phenobiology texts she'd accessed in the diplomatic database. Needs higher concentration. Improvising further, Ilara modified her quarter's atmospheric controls, creating a localized bubble of oxygen-rich air around the ambassador. It wasn't perfect. The unit wasn't designed for such precise manipulation, but it was enough to stabilize him temporarily. With Tirash breathing easier, she ventured back into the corridor, respirator firmly in place. One by one, she dragged diplomatic representatives into her quarters, applying knowledge gleaned from casual study of xenobiology to stabilize each species' unique requirements. The felon crystalline diplomat required sonic vibrations to clear its resonance chambers. The gelatinous ore needed electrical stimulation to maintain neural cohesion. Each rescue presented a unique puzzle that Ilara solved through a combination of scientific knowledge and intuitive leaps. When emergency crews finally breached the diplomatic wing, they found a scene that would become legendary throughout council space. A supposedly primitive human administering life-saving care to 7 different species simultaneously, using nothing but repurposed room components and remembered fragments of biological data. Security Director Krazel stood in the doorway, multifaceted eyes unreadable as he surveyed the scene. How did you know the correct emergency procedures for species you've never encountered before? He demanded. Ilara looked up from adjusting an atmospheric regulator she jury-rigged for a gaseous Threl diplomat. I didn't, she admitted, exhaustion evident in her voice. I observed, extrapolated, and improvised. She gestured toward the diplomatic database terminal. Your systems contain data. I merely applied it creatively. From his recovery bed, Ambassador Tirash's voice rasped weakly. The humans saved us all while your security protocols failed. director. Perhaps it's time to reconsider your assessment of her species. In the council chamber hours later, the recording of Ilara's actions played before the assembled representatives. High Chancellor Vexorn's voice cut through the murmurs of amazement. "It seems we have significantly underestimated humans," he conceded. "The question now becomes, what else might they be capable of?" 3 diplomatic cycles after the environmental crisis, Ilara found herself with unprecedented access to council facilities. Her heroic actions had earned her a measure of trust among certain factions, particularly the pragmatic Mithrai and the analytical Felon. Each day brought invitations to scientific symposiums, cultural exchanges, and diplomatic functions. She accepted every opportunity, absorbing knowledge voraciously, while carefully mapping the station's layout, security protocols, and political dynamics. The pattern was becoming clear. The Council wasn't a unified entity, but a fragile alliance of species with competing agendas. "You've become quite popular," observed Ambassador Tirash, as they strolled through the botanical gardens, a vast chamber housing plant species from 1,000 worlds. "The Science Directorate has twice requested your input on theoretical quantum models." "It's fascinating work," Ilara replied, pausing to examine a luminescent fern that responded to neural impulses. "Though I suspect Director Krazel disapproves of my expanded freedoms." Tirash's mandibles clicked in confirmed amusement. "The Security Directorate has always prioritized caution over opportunity." A subtle vibration through the deck plates interrupted their conversation, a communications priority alert on Tirash's personal frequency. The ambassador's inner eyelids flickered rapidly as he processed the message. "I must attend an emergency session," he said, scales darkening with concern. "Please return to your quarters, Dr. Chen. For your safety." Something in his tone triggered Ilara's suspicions. She nodded compliance but instead made her way to the diplomatic archives, once Tirash departed. Her security clearance, granted after the environmental crisis, allowed access to historical records but not classified materials. That limitation hadn't stopped her from identifying backdoor access protocols through careful observation of archive technicians. Within minutes, she bypassed 3 security layers to access restricted council communications. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Security Director Krazel had successfully argued that humanity represented an unacceptable evolutionary anomaly, requiring containment. The Council had voted, narrowly, to quarantine Earth and implement memory modification protocols on Ilara before returning her with falsified recollections. More disturbing still were references to existing human containment measures dating back centuries. Earth hadn't been unknown to the Council. It had been deliberately isolated. Ilara downloaded critical files to a data crystal she'd fashioned from components scavenged from her quarters, then erased evidence of her access. She needed to warn Earth, which meant she needed a ship. The emergency session provided perfect cover. Security resources would be concentrated around the council chamber. Maintenance tunnels connected the diplomatic sector to the shuttle bays through circuitous routes designed for service drones. These passages were cramped for most council species, but perfectly navigable for a human. Ilara slipped into a narrow access port hidden behind atmospheric regulators in her quarters, a passage she discovered while repairing systems after the crisis. The tunnels were dimly illuminated by bioluminescent markers, the air thick with the scent of lubricants and ozone. Station security algorithms would predict direct movement toward the shuttle bay. Instead, Ilara doubled back repeatedly, moving in counterintuitive patterns. She descended 3 levels before ascending 5, crossed through residential sectors, and utilized service elevators instead of primary transport tubes. After 40 minutes of methodical movement, she reached Auxiliary Shuttle Bay 3, the least used and therefore least monitored of the station's transportation hubs. 2 maintenance workers, Crystalline Felon, were calibrating a small diplomatic shuttle's navigation system. Ilara approached openly, projecting confidence. "Priority diplomatic transport," she announced, displaying the clearance badge Ambassador Tirash had provided her. "Council authorization." The Felon hesitated, their crystalline forms vibrating uncertainty. We received no notification. Emergency session protocols. Ilara interjected smoothly. Communications lockdown during security assessments. It was a calculated risk based on council procedures she'd studied. The maintenance workers exchanged frequencies, then reluctantly cleared her for departure. As the shuttle systems initialized, Ilara allowed herself a moment of hope. That hope shattered as the bay doors locked down and security personnel flooded the chamber. Security Director Kreisel himself stepped forward, multifaceted eyes gleaming with vindication. Predictable behavior confirms the threat assessment, he announced. Seize the human and prepare for quarantine protocols. Ambassador Tirash pushed through the security personnel, his scales flushed dark with emotion. Dr. Chen, why would you attempt this? We were making progress with the council. Ilara met his gaze steadily. Ask your security director about the centuries-long quarantine of Earth. Ask him why my people have been kept isolated while being secretly monitored. Her voice carried clearly through the bay. Ask him what he fears about humanity that requires such extreme measures. The containment chamber where Ilara awaited judgment was different from her original cell, designed not merely to hold but to isolate. No sound penetrated its walls. No electromagnetic frequencies could be detected. The Council had learned from their previous underestimation of human capabilities. 3 days passed in sensory deprivation, a psychological tactic Ilara recognized from Earth's own history. She maintained sanity by reciting quantum equations and constructing mental models of potential escape scenarios, though each seemed less viable than the last. The attack came without warning. First, a subsonic vibration that rattled her bones. Then darkness as emergency systems failed. When auxiliary lighting activated, bathing the chamber in eerie blue, the containment field had vanished. Ilara remained motionless, suspecting a security test. But the klaxons that followed, their pitch modulating in patterns she recognized as highest-level alerts, suggested genuine crisis. The chamber door slid partially open, jammed by structural damage. Beyond lay chaos. Emergency crews rushing past, ignoring her completely in their response to greater threats. Smoke hung in the corridor, acrid and tinged with metallic particles. Ilara slipped through the damaged doorway, instinct driving her toward the command center rather than escape routes. Something catastrophic was happening to the station, and with it, her evidence about Earth's quarantine might be lost. A tremendous impact rocked the station, throwing Ilara against a bulkhead. Through a viewport, she glimpsed the cause. A massive warship of unfamiliar design, its hull rippling with darkness that seemed to absorb nearby light. Energy weapons carved precise patterns into the station's outer rings, targeting communications arrays and defensive systems with surgical precision. Void Herald primary vessel has breached defensive grid, announced the station eye. Voice distorted by damaged systems. All non-essential personnel evacuate. Containment breach in sectors 7 through 12. Ilara's scientific mind processed the tactical situation with cold clarity. The attackers were targeting specific systems, not attempting to destroy the station, but to disable key functions. This wasn't random destruction. It was a precision strike with defined objectives. She navigated through increasingly damaged sections, using maintenance passages to avoid security checkpoints. Emergency bulkheads had sealed many primary corridors, but Ilara's knowledge of station architecture, meticulously gathered during her time as diplomatic guest, proved invaluable. The command center's outer security perimeter had been abandoned, defensive positions empty as personnel responded to more critical breaches. Inside, she found council representatives in disarray. High Chancellor Vexorn stood at the primary tactical display, his crystalline form radiating stress harmonics visible even to human eyes. Station defense grid compromised, reported a technician, voice steady despite the crisis. I-Core under direct attack. Targeting algorithms failing. How did they penetrate our defenses? Demanded Vexorn. We've upgraded all protocols since their last incursion. Security Director Krasel's multifaceted eyes darted to Ilara as she entered. The human. Contain her immediately. Your station is under attack, and that's your priority. Ilara challenged, stepping forward. The Void Heralds are targeting your command systems, not your physical structure. Chancellor Vexorn raised a crystalline appendage, silencing Kryzel's protest. Explain. Their attack pattern is systematic. Communications first, then defensive grids, now your AI core. They're isolating you before delivering their primary strike. Ilara moved to a tactical display, hands moving across unfamiliar controls with surprising confidence. There, your defensive algorithms are being rewritten. Not destroyed, reprogrammed. The display confirmed her analysis, showing cascading failures across automated defense systems. Our programmers cannot counteract the intrusion, stated a Thelen technician. The code reconfigures faster than we can analyze it. Ilara studied the scrolling algorithms, recognizing patterns despite their alien structure. It's a recursive polynomial sequence using dimensional mathematics. May I? After a moment of hesitation, Vexorn nodded. Ilara's fingers flew across the interface, applying theoretical quantum principles from her research on Earth, work that had inadvertently triggered her abduction. She mentally translated between mathematical systems, finding equivalencies between her understanding and council technology. The attack uses predictable progression, she explained while working. Your defenses fail because they follow similar logical patterns. To counter, we need to introduce intentional irregularities, mathematical noise that disrupts their predictions. On the main view screen, the Void Herald ship continued its methodical attack, energy weapons targeting key systems with devastating accuracy. But as Ilara's improvised countermeasures took effect, defensive turrets began firing in erratic patterns that the attacking vessel couldn't anticipate. How is this possible? Whispered Kryzel, hatred momentarily overcome by astonishment. She has no training on our systems. Ambassador Tirash, who had joined the command staff, clicked his mandibles in what might have been grim satisfaction. Perhaps now you understand what you've been fighting so hard to suppress, Director. This is why humans frighten you so much. In the aftermath of the attack, the Council convened an emergency session in the auxiliary chamber, the primary hall having suffered significant damage. Representatives from all 17 founding species gathered around a holographic display showing the captured Void Herald vessel, now held in a containment field at the station's outer docking ring. Ilara stood not as prisoner, but as honored guest, her status transformed by actions that had saved countless lives. The defensive algorithms she created had not only repelled the attack, but enabled the capture of a Herald ship, an unprecedented achievement in the Council's long conflict with the mysterious faction. High Chancellor Vexorn's resonant voice filled the chamber. The prisoner has been secured and is prepared for interrogation. Security Director Kryzel will oversee the procedure. Chancellor, if I may, Ilara interjected, stepping forward. Standard interrogation protocols will fail. Based on what we've seen of Void Herald technology, they likely have neural protections against conventional questioning. Kryzel's multifaceted eyes narrowed. And what would a human know of our interrogation procedures? Nothing, Ilara admitted. But I understand pattern recognition and psychological profiling. Allow me to observe the interrogation, at minimum. After brief deliberation, the Council agreed, though not without reservation from security factions. The interrogation chamber was clinically austere, designed to disorient with subtly shifting geometries and modulated gravity. At its center stood the captured Herald, a being encased in armor of impossible darkness that seemed to bend light around it. When the helmet was removed, collective gasps echoed through the observation room. The face beneath was not alien but distressingly familiar, a being with features remarkably similar to Council species, though twisted by biotechnological augmentations. Greetings, architects of stagnation, the Herald said, voice modulating across multiple frequencies simultaneously. Have you brought the human anomaly to witness your failure? Ilara studied the being carefully, noting subtle physiological responses that betrayed anxiety despite its confident tone. The herald's eyes kept shifting toward her with what appeared to be genuine fear. "Why attack this station?" demanded Krazel. "What were your objectives?" The herald smiled, a disturbing expression on its augmented face. "The same objective we have pursued for millennia. Stability, predictability, evolutionary consistency. You targeted specific sections," Ilara observed quietly. "Communications, then defenses, then directly for the containment sector where I was held. You came for me specifically." The herald's augmented eyes widened fractionally, confirmation Ilara had sought. "The human understands," it said. "Of course she does. Their kind always sees patterns where others perceive only chaos." Ambassador Tirash stepped forward. "Explain your interest in humans." "Interest? No. Fear. Necessity." The herald's voice stabilized on a single chilling frequency. "We are not your enemy. We are your protectors, guardians against chaos." With a gesture from Krazel, archives materialized around them. Classified records detailing centuries of covert observation of Earth, subtle interventions in human development, strategic elimination of promising researchers approaching crucial technological thresholds. "You've been limiting human technological advancement," Ilara whispered, the truth crystallizing in her mind. "But why?" "For the same reason the Council quarantined your kind once they discovered you," answered the herald. "Humans are a deviation in the predictable course of evolution. You think wrong." At Ilara's confused expression, the herald continued. "All Council species developed linear cognition, methodical, predictable problem-solving, requiring complete information. It's the standard evolutionary path for advanced intelligence across the galaxy." The herald's gaze fixed on Ilara with a mixture of fascination and dread. "But humans make cognitive leaps without complete data. You form intuitive connections, embrace risk, thrive on uncertainty. Where Council species see insufficient information and delay action, humans see patterns in the chaos and act anyway." "That's not special," Ilara argued. "That's just human thinking." "Precisely," the herald replied. "And it is dangerously unpredictable. Our models project that unrestricted human development would lead to technological advancement at an exponential rather than linear rate. Within mere centuries of achieving space travel, humans would surpass technologies that took Council species millennia to develop." The observation room had fallen silent, Council representatives absorbing implications that contradicted millennia of assumed evolutionary constants. "Worse still," continued the herald, "unlike most sentient species whose performance deteriorates under stress, humans inexplicably improve. Your creativity and problem-solving abilities actually increase during crisis, a cognitive profile that makes your species impossible to reliably predict or control." Tirash turned to Ilara. "This explains everything. Your ability to learn our language without formal instruction, your improvised solutions during the environmental crisis, even your counterintuitive escape route that nearly succeeded. We are not separate from the Council," the herald concluded, its augmented features settling into resignation. "We are the Council's hidden guardians, ensuring evolutionary stability across the galaxy. Until humans appeared, our task was simple. Now, the equation has changed irrevocably." The observation deck of the Council vessel Harmonic Convergence offered a breathtaking view of Earth, its blue-white sphere suspended against velvet darkness. Ilara pressed her palm against the transparent alloy, the closest she'd been to home in months. Tears blurred her vision, briefly before she blinked them away, composing herself as footsteps approached. "The Council has finished deliberations," announced High Chancellor Vexorn, his crystalline form refracting starlight, as he moved to stand beside her. "It was not without contention." "I imagine not," Ilara replied, her gaze fixed on the planet below. 8 billion unpredictable humans must terrify a significant portion of your representatives. Ambassador Tirash joined them, silver scales gleaming softly. "Fear and opportunity often occupy the same space, Dr. Chen. Many council species recognize that very unpredictability as potentially invaluable. The three stood in contemplative silence, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath them. From this distance, the divisions and conflicts that dominated human history seemed insignificant, a perspective Ilara wished she could share with her fellow humans. The vote was narrow, Vexorn finally continued. But the decision is made. Earth will be welcomed into the galactic community with appropriate preparations. What exactly does that mean? Ilara asked, turning to face the Chancellor directly. It means we acknowledge the failure of quarantine policy, he replied. The Void Herald faction has been officially dissolved, its members reintegrated into standard council operations under supervision. Tirash's mandibles clicked with subtle amusement. It means, Dr. Chen, that you've changed the course of galactic politics by simply being human. A holographic display materialized between them, showing a modulated introduction protocol, a carefully orchestrated series of revelations designed to prepare Earth for the existence of galactic civilization without causing societal disruption. You will return as our emissary, Vexorn explained, with knowledge and technologies that will accelerate human development while preparing your people psychologically for first contact. Ilara studied the protocol critically. This timeline is too conservative. Humans adapt faster than your models predict. The timeline is based on standard species integration patterns, began Vexorn, which don't apply to humans. Ilara interrupted. That's the entire point of what we've learned. She manipulated the hologram, compressing decades of planned gradual revelation into years. Trust me on this. We're ready. Before the Chancellor could respond, alarm frequencies echoed through the observation deck. A Mithrai tactical officer rushed in, scales flushed with urgency. Long-range sensors have detected an anomaly approaching from beyond the galactic rim, the officer reported. Massive energy signature, unlike anything in our databases. The holographic display shifted to show sensor readings, an object of impossible scale moving toward the Milky Way at relativistic speeds. Data scrolled alongside the image, statistical probabilities and impact projections that painted an increasingly grim picture. How long until it reaches inhabited systems? Asked Vexorn, his crystalline structure vibrating with tension. At current velocity, approximately 7 standard cycles, replied the tactical officer. It's already consumed 3 satellite galaxies. A cosmic devourer, whispered Tirash, inner eyelids flickering rapidly. They were thought to be theoretical constructs. Ilara studied the data with scientific detachment that belied her inner turmoil. You need to accelerate first contact immediately, she stated firmly. This crisis requires council focus, argued Vexorn. Human integration must be delayed until... No, Ilara interrupted, her voice steady with conviction. This is precisely when you need humans most. She expanded the holographic display, highlighting the behavioral patterns of the approaching entity. Look at these readings. It's consuming energy in predictable patterns, following established physical laws. Your species excel at understanding such patterns and developing theoretical responses. But theoretical solutions won't save us from actual extinction, countered Tirash. Exactly, Ilara said, a slow smile forming. That's where humans come in. We specialize in turning theoretical into practical, in making impossible leaps between concept and implementation. She turned back to Earth, her expression resolute. You've had peace so long you've forgotten how to face extinction-level threats. Humans face them constantly. In our fiction, our planning, our nightmares. It's built into our psychology. Chancellor Vexorn's crystalline form pulsed with frequencies that indicated deep consideration. You propose full disclosure to Earth immediately. The societal shock could be devastating. Devastating. Ilara laughed softly. Chancellor, humans have been imagining alien civilizations since we first looked at the stars. The shock will be followed by adaptation faster than your models can predict. And then, she gestured toward the approaching cosmic anomaly. Then you'll see what humans do best. face impossible odds, and find a way to win anyway. As the council representatives debated emergency protocols, Ilara returned her gaze to Earth. Soon, she would descend with knowledge that would forever change human history, not just of alien life, but of a threat that would unite humanity as never before. For the first time since her abduction, she felt not fear or uncertainty, but anticipation. The Galactic Council had seized one human and thought they'd captured a curiosity. Instead, they'd found their salvation in the species they had feared most.